In 1513, when Spanish ships first appeared off the coast of southwest Florida, the people who lived there did not flee. They stood on tall shell mounds, watching. They held bows ready. They sent canoes to meet the strangers, not with gifts, but with warning shots. This was not a land of scattered tribes. This was a kingdom. Long before Columbus, the Calusa had built a society unlike any other in North America. They did not farm corn. They did not raise crops. Instead, they ruled the sea. From the estuaries of the Caloosahatchee River to the islands of the 10,000 Islands, they harvested fish, shellfish, and sea turtles. They turned shells into tools, weapons, and massive mounds that rose like hills from the flat coast. Their capital, Calusa, stood on Mound Key, a man-made island built entirely from oyster, conch, and whelk shells. At its center rose a great council house, large enough to hold 2,000 people. From this shell throne, the paramount chief, or cacique, ruled over dozens of villages. His word carried across waterways. His warriors paddled swift canoes armed with shell-tipped arrows and wooden clubs. The Calusa had no need for gold. Their wealth was fish. Their power was unity. Their strength was knowledge of tides, winds, and hidden channels. When the Spanish came, they expected to find savages. Instead, they found a state. And states do not surrender easily. The first Spaniard to meet the Calusa was Juan Ponce de Leon. In 1513, he landed near Charlotte Harbor. He named the land La Florida for its flowers. But the Calusa gave him no welcome. They attacked. Arrows struck his men. One pierced his thigh. He fled. He returned in 1521 with 200 settlers, hoping to build a colony. Again the Calusa struck. They ambushed his camp at night. Ponce de Leon was wounded once more. He sailed back to Cuba and died soon after. The message was clear. This land was defended. But Spain would not stop. More ships would come, more soldiers, more priests. The Calusa knew this. They watched the horizon. They sharpened their arrows. They prepared. What the Spanish did not understand was this. The Calusa were not just fighting invaders. They were protecting a world built on water, shell, and memory. A world that had lasted for centuries. And they would not let it fall without a fight. In 1549, a Spanish ship wrecked on the Florida coast. Among the survivors was a boy named Hernando de Escalante Fontaneda. He was 13 years old. The Calusa captured him. He expected death. Instead, they kept him alive.
For 17 years, Fontaneda lived among the Calusa. He learned their language. He ate their food. He traveled in their canoes. He saw their ceremonies. He watched their leaders make decisions. He became, in many ways, one of them. Years later, after he was rescued by Spanish soldiers, he wrote a memoir. It is one of the few first-hand accounts of Calusa life. His words are not always kind. He called them cruel and proud, but his details are precise. He described their shell tools, their fishing weirs, their belief in three souls, and their fierce loyalty to their chief. Most importantly, he recorded their strategy. The Calusa did not fight fair. They did not meet Spaniards in open battle. They used the land as a weapon. They lured ships into shallow bays where they ran aground. They attacked at dawn from hidden mangrove tunnels. They poisoned wells. They cut supply lines. They vanished into the islands, only to strike again days later. Fontaneda also revealed something deeper. The Calusa were not alone. They commanded a network of allied tribes, Tequesta to the southeast, Tocobaga to the north, and others across the Everglades. Through marriage, trade, and fear, the Calusa chief held power over a vast territory. This was not a tribe. It was an empire of water. When Pedro Menendez de Avilés arrived in 1566, he knew of Fontaneda's account. Menendez was Spain's most ruthless admiral. He had just founded St. Augustine. Now he wanted to claim the southwest. He sailed into Calusa with 500 soldiers. He demanded the Calusa submit to Spain and convert to Christianity. The chief, Carlos, did not bow. Instead, he invited Menendez to a feast. It was a trap, or so Menendez feared, but he went anyway. He brought gifts: cloth, beads, iron tools. Carlos accepted them. Then he made a counteroffer: "Marry my sister." Menendez agreed. He took the chief's sister as his wife. In Calusa custom, this created a bond. The two leaders were now kin. For a time, peace held. But peace among conquerors and the conquered is never stable. Menendez wanted a fort. Carlos wanted Spanish weapons to fight his enemies. Each side used the other. Tension grew. Then, in 1567, Carlos broke the alliance. He refused to hand over hostages. He stopped sending food to the Spanish camp. He gathered warriors from across his domain. Menendez responded with violence. He captured Carlos and held him prisoner.
The Calusa did not panic. They waited. And then, under cover of night, they freed their chief. Carlos returned to his shell throne. The war had truly begun. After Carlos escaped, open war erupted. The Spanish built a small fort near Calusa. They called it San Antón de Carlos. It stood on Mound Key, overlooking the chief's own council house. This was not diplomacy. It was occupation. The Calusa responded with relentless raids. They attacked Spanish fishing parties. They burned supply boats. They poisoned the water holes near the fort. Spanish soldiers fell sick. Others starved. Menendez sent more troops, but the Calusa knew every channel, every sandbar, every hidden cove. Spanish ships, built for the open ocean, got stuck in the shallow bays. Calusa canoes, narrow and light, moved like shadows through the mangroves. In 1568, the Calusa struck the fort itself. Hundreds of warriors paddled in at dawn. They scaled the walls with ropes made of palm fiber. They fought hand to hand. Spanish muskets misfired in the damp air. Calusa arrows found their mark. The Spanish held the fort, but barely. Menendez realized he could not win by force alone. He turned to betrayal. He learned that Carlos had rivals within his own court. One was a war chief named Felipe. Another was Carlos's own nephew. Menendez offered them power if they turned against Carlos. Divide and conquer. It was an old Spanish tactic. It worked. In 1569, Felipe staged a coup. With Spanish backing, he killed Carlos and took the throne. The Calusa people did not accept this easily. Many villages refused to follow Felipe. They saw him as a puppet. Resistance continued. Felipe tried to prove his loyalty to Spain. He allowed Jesuit priests to build a mission on Mound Key. He let them preach. He even pretended to convert. But the priests grew bold. They demanded the Calusa abandon their gods. They smashed sacred objects. They forbade traditional dances. The people grew angry. In 1570, a group of Calusa warriors entered the mission. They killed the priests. They burned the chapel. Felipe did nothing to stop them.
Perhaps he could not. Perhaps he did not want to. The Spanish abandoned San Antón de Carlos soon after. They left behind broken tools, rusted nails, and the bones of their dead. The Calusa reclaimed Mound Key. They rebuilt their council house. They buried their enemies' weapons in shell mounds, as offerings or warnings. For 30 years, no Spanish ship dared land in Calusa territory. The island people had won. Victory did not mean safety. While the Calusa had beaten the Spanish, new threats were rising. Disease came first. Even without direct contact, European illnesses traveled inland through trade routes: smallpox, measles, influenza. The Calusa had no immunity. Villages shrank, shell mounds stopped growing, the population fell. Then came the English. By the late 1600s, England controlled the Carolinas. English traders armed the Creek and Yamasee tribes with guns. These groups began raiding south, into Calusa lands. The Calusa had always fought with bows and clubs. Now they faced muskets. They tried to adapt. They traded with the Spanish in St. Augustine for iron tools and weapons, but Spain was weak. It could not protect them. Worse, the Calusa's old allies began to fall. The Tequesta, once strong in Miami, were nearly gone by 1700. The Tocobaga had vanished. The network that once gave the Calusa power was breaking apart. Still, they resisted. In 1702, during Queen Anne's War, English-backed raiders attacked Calusa villages. The Calusa fought back. They burned their own homes to deny shelter to enemies. They retreated deeper into the Everglades. In 1711, the Spanish tried one last time to save them. They invited the Calusa to move to Cuba. The offer was desperate. Cuba was foreign. The sea was wide. But staying meant death. Some Calusa leaders agreed.
In 1711, and again in 1713, groups of Calusa sailed to Havana. They numbered in the hundreds. They brought their shells, their tools, their memories. But Cuba was not home. Many died of disease. Others starved. The Spanish did not know how to feed people who lived on fish and shellfish. Those who remained in Florida faced worse. By 1743, only a few hundred Calusa were left. Spanish records mention a small village near Charlotte Harbor. They still fished. They still spoke their language. Then, in 1763, Spain gave Florida to Britain. The last Calusa fled to Cuba. They vanished from their homeland. No one knows exactly when the last speaker of the Calusa language died, but by 1800, the shell mounds stood empty. The canoes rotted. The council house collapsed into the earth. The island people were gone. The Calusa did not leave written records. They left shells. For centuries, their mounds were mistaken for natural hills. Farmers plowed them. Developers built houses on them. The truth lay buried. Then, in the 1900s, archaeologists began to dig. On Mound Key, they found post holes from the Great Council House. They found Spanish artifacts mixed with Calusa tools, proof of contact, conflict, and coexistence. They found fish bones, turtle shells, and evidence of massive feasts. They also found something rare: preserved wooden carvings. The Calusa carved masks, animals, and human figures from Cyprus. These had survived in the wet soil for 500 years. Each carving told a story. The Calusa were not primitive. They were engineers. They built canals to control water flow. They created fish traps that fed thousands. They managed ecosystems with precision. Their resistance was not just military, it was cultural. They refused to become farmers. They refused to worship foreign gods. They refused to live by European rules. Even in defeat, they held to their way of life until the very end. Today, their descendants are hard to trace. Some may live among the Seminole or Miccosukee tribes. Others blended into Cuban communities. But their legacy remains in the land. Walk the shores of Estero Bay. Stand on a shell mound.
Listen to the wind through the mangroves. You were standing where warriors once watched for sails on the horizon, where chiefs made decisions that shaped a kingdom, where a people chose freedom over surrender, even when it meant disappearance. The Calusa did not win in the end, but they fought longer and harder than almost any native group in the southeast, and for over 200 years they kept their world intact against the greatest empire on earth. That is not failure. That is honor.